Alright guys, so in this tutorial series we're going to be creating an Evernote clone, and it's going to be almost a fully functional Evernote clone. There's going to be certain features that we're not going to be implementing in this tutorial, such as users, although I do have another previous video that I created where we do go over that. So if you'd like to learn more about that, there is a link in the description below for that video series. But in this video we're just going to focus on Evernote. We're going to be using Firebase, and we're going to be using a library called Reactjs. So I think it's time for us to go ahead and demonstrate what it is we're going to be making in this app. So I can come over here and click New Note and enter a new title. Let's call it New Note. I submitted the note, and as you can see, it selects it automatically. And over here on the right, we have a text editor, and we can edit the title. I'll just call it like New Note 2. And then I can come down here. You can see it updated live, and I can go heading 1. This is a header. And again, you can see it updates live over here. And so I can, this is some more text, just to show that we can have different size texts and everything. Create another note. We'll just say test list, and come in here and create a list, 1, 2, 3. So you can see we can create lists. We can make text bold, and it updates live over here, and I can go through and select each note. I can also delete my notes, and it says, are you sure you want to delete note 2? I'll click yes, and it goes ahead and selects the previous one automatically for me, and I'll delete this one as well. And that is what we're going to be making in this tutorial series. So I'll come over to here to Firebase. You're going to want to go to console.firebase.google.com. Make sure you create a Firebase account. You can just go to Firebase, create an account, and once you have the account, go to console.firebase.google.com, and you'll be presented with this. Go ahead and click Add Project, and inside of here, we'll just call it Evernote Clone, and make sure you check this box and click Create Project. Once that finishes, go ahead and click Continue. And you'll see this dashboard screen over here. On the left, click Database. Now, Firebase has two different types of databases. They have Cloud Firestore and the Real-Time Database. Real-Time Database is their older original database, and Firestore is their newer database, so that's what we're going to be using. When you click Create Database, just make sure you click it under Cloud Firestore and not Real-Time Database. So let's go ahead and click Create Database. Go ahead and start it in the test mode. Click Next. Go ahead and click the, select the location nearest you, and then done, and then wait for that to finish. Once that finishes, you'll be brought to this screen right here. This is going to be basically a data table that shows a visual representation of your data inside of the database. Now, if I click this rules area here, you can see that it's very similar to JavaScript. It's a little different, but it's got similar syntax. And you can see here it says allow, read, write. And what that's saying is you can both read and write from this no matter what. If you're not authenticated, it doesn't matter who you are or any of that. You can read and write to this database. So in a production environment, you're not going to want to have this. You're going to want to have very strict access rules, and you're going to want to set up authentication for your app, but we're not going to be doing any of this in this tutorial. I do have a video where I do go over authentication, creating login forms and sign up forms all through Firebase. I will include a link in the description for you to watch that tutorial series, which includes those topics, but we're not going to go over that in this particular video. So just keep that in mind. And so when we use and we set up our Firebase within the app itself, we're going to be exposing our API key. So if anybody were to get a hold of that, they could just use your Firebase. So what I do is I delete my key once I'm done with the tutorial series, or just don't show anybody your API key. Either of those, you'll be fine. Just make sure you don't give away your API key to anybody. So now that that's been said, we can go to Project Overview here, and then you go ahead and click this little icon right here that looks like two HTML brackets. And when you click that, just name this Evernote tutorial. Leave this unchecked and click Register App. And then once that finishes, go ahead and I want you to copy this object right here. Don't include the script tags, just copy what's inside of here. And actually, you don't have to copy it right now. We'll just keep this in mind, keep this window open, keep this right here, and we'll get back to this shortly. Let's go ahead and install all of our dependencies for the project first, and then we'll paste this into our application. So we will be using create React app in order to initialize the React application project. So go ahead and go to this link. I will include it in the description. So once you get to this link, you'll see instructions on how to install create React app. It's extremely simple, and it is a Facebook tutorial on how to do it. It's very, very short, very, very simple. Go ahead and install that. And once you do have that installed, open up your terminal window. I'm going to be using Windows. You can use any terminal window from either Linux, Mac, or Windows to follow along. But let me increase the font size of this really quick so you can see all of this. Okay, that should be quite a bit better for you. So go ahead and navigate to wherever you want your project to be. So I'm going to be inside of my documents folder, or actually Dropbox. So go ahead and just navigate to wherever you want your project to be. And I'm going to say create React app, just like that. And then you're going to want to put the name of the app. So I'm going to say Evernote tutorial. And then when you click enter, it's going to actually go ahead and install this this project directory tree that's basically ready for you to get started on React. So let's go ahead and wait for this to finish. Okay, so once that finishes, we're going to want to go ahead and install our first dependency. We're going to be using Material UI for this, which is going to be a library that allows us to make styling very easy. It's going to handle a lot of things. It just includes React components that we can use that makes things look pretty by default, essentially, so that we can focus solely on React and not have to worry about writing a ton of CSS. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to say npm install at material-ui/core. So go ahead and install that. And once that's done, go ahead and do npm install at material-ui/icons. And this is going to give us a ton of icons to be able to use, which I think we're only going to be using 2 icons, the trash can for delete and the pencil and paper for edit. So go ahead and wait for that to finish. Okay, and for our text editor, we'll be using React Quill, which is an open source library. So we will say npm install React-Quill, Quill. Go ahead and install that. And finally, we're going to go ahead and install Firebase. So npm install Firebase. So let that finish really quick. All right, so that's going to be all of our dependencies here. So I'm going to go ahead and clear my console and actually just type in npm start to go ahead and get React up and running, just to make sure everything is running smoothly. So once this pops up, I'll also go ahead and open up my console just to see if we have any errors, and we do not. So it looks like everything installed properly. So over here, go ahead and let's make sure we have this this stuff copied here. And now that we have our Firebase config copied, let's go ahead and put it inside of our app just to get that part knocked out so we don't have to worry about it in just a moment. So I've got my directory opened up now, and I'll go into my source folder here, and you want to open your index.js file. So we're going to want to do a quick require. So we're going to say const Firebase is equal to require, and then inside of here we want to put inside of quotes Firebase. So we're requiring Firebase, and then underneath this, we want to just go ahead and say require, and then in quotes, Firebase/Firestore. Oops, there we go. Cool. So under this, you remember we copied that stuff from Firebase, so make sure you have that copied, and let's go ahead and paste that here. Now I'm going to change var to const, and I'm going to get rid of these 2 comments right here. All right. And what I like to do, just to make it might not actually be cleaner, but this is the way I like to do it. I like to get rid of this variable here. Just get rid of the variable, and then just take the actual object itself and paste it in between the parentheses there. That's just how I like to do it, but you can do it either way. So now we have Firebase initialized inside of our application. I'm saving it right now, and I'm coming over to the React app just to make sure I don't have any errors. And it says here, it looks like you're using the development build of Firebase JS SDK. Now this is perfectly fine. This is saying we're using the development build, which is fine because we are in development. Now we're going to be getting this message throughout the entire tutorial, so we can safely ignore this particular message. So as you see it here in the console, as we work through the tutorial, just ignore this, it's fine. All right, moving on. So the first thing I like to do is I like to come in here and delete all this default stuff that comes with the default React app. So I go into app.js here, and inside of this return, I'm going to get rid of this whole thing and make it a class. So I'll come in here and say class app extends react.component. And now we have a class instead of a function, which the class needs to actually implement the render function. And inside of the render function, you have to return some HTML. So for now, I'll put in a div that just says hello world. Cool. So I'll save that, and let's see what we end up with really quick. We have hello world here. Cool. So as most of you probably know, the way that this works is inside of the index.js file, we have this app element, which is represented by this app class here, because we are importing it right here. And what this is doing is React DOM.render takes whatever's inside of here, does some React magic to turn it into actual code that basically we write it in a React way, and then it takes that React way and turns it into actual code that the browser understands, and then it pushes it into document.getElementById root. And if I come in here, you can see if I go to elements, expand this, get rid of this. If I go inside a body here, you can see there's this div here with an ID of root, and everything inside of the React application is going to get injected inside of this div called root. So you don't actually have to, I really want you guys to understand React. So let's go into the public here, and inside the index.html, you can see that that div is actually right here with root. So what I want to do, just to kind of show you and get you really comfortable with this sort of idea, is instead of call it root, I'm going to call it Evernote container. So go ahead and call this Evernote container, and I want you to save it. And then I want you to take that, copy it, and paste it inside of here. So now we're injecting it inside of a div called Evernote container instead of root. And I want you to save both of those files and come back in here and notice that it works still. And if you come back over here, you can see that that div has an ID of Evernote container. So that's just to kind of get you a little bit comfortable with how React is working, and that it's not entirely magic. You can actually come in here and change some of these things. It's not mandatory, and you can actually extend it too. This is all open source. You don't have to be afraid of React. All right, there's actually one more thing we need to add. So inside of the source folder, create a new file, call that helpers.js. And inside of here, we're going to paste some stuff. Go to the source code. The source code is going to be linked in the description of this video. Go ahead and go to that source code, find the helpers.js file, and paste this in. So what this is going to be, we have a debounce function, which is going to be helpful for us because when we are typing inside of the text editor, we're going to want to update the database live. However, we don't want to send requests every single time we type a letter. We're going to want to wait for the user to stop typing for about a second or so, maybe 2 seconds before we update the database, so that we're not just going crazy on the database with all these calls, these HTTP calls. So we're going to be using a debounce function right here. And then we're also going to have this export function, remove HTML tags. That function is going to be for our preview on the left sidebar. Whenever we see the list of notes, we're going to remove the HTML for the preview. And basically, React Quill, the text editor library that we're using, actually stores it. It displays it as actual HTML. So we're going to be saving HTML as a string to the database. So when we display the preview in the sidebar, we don't want to show the HTML tags. That would just look weird. So we have this function here that's going to be removing the HTML from that, so we can just see the plain text previews. So for the majority of the application, we're going to be using something called with styles, which is actually going to be from Material UI instead of writing plain CSS. But there is going to be a little of plain CSS for the app level project. So go ahead and open up your app.css, and we want to go ahead and remove all this stuff. This was just the default CSS that we saw when we first started up our React application with create React app. It had the big, React logo, and it was spinning around and doing cool stuff. We don't need any of that, so go ahead and remove all that. Go to the source code, and in the source code, you'll find app.css. Go ahead, copy all of that and paste it in here. We don't want to worry about CSS in this tutorial, so we're going to be copying all of our styles from the source code and pasting that stuff in. So go ahead and save your app.css file. Cool, so we're ready to go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and remove this import logo from the SVG here. We're not going to be using that. That's just the React logo that's included with the project. So what we want to do is start with a constructor. And inside of this constructor, we have to go ahead and implement the super. And then what we'll do is create some initial state. So we'll say this.state is equal to, and inside of this object, we're going to have 3 slices of state. One is going to be called selected note index, and that will be set to null by default. These will all be null by default. So selected note as well, that'll be null, and then notes, which will be the array of all of the notes that we have, and that will also be null. So now that we have our initial state, what we want to do is underneath the render function, we want to go ahead and implement the React hook called component did mount. And what that is whenever this particular component, the app component, is loaded successfully inside of the DOM, this will get called automatically by React. It is a lifecycle hook that is built into React. So let's go ahead and implement component did mount. And we want to go ahead and go into Firebase, grab all of the notes, and then set our state with the notes, this little slice right here. But in order to do that, we actually have to come up here and import Firebase really quick. So underneath all of these imports, let's go ahead and say const Firebase is equal to require, and then Firebase. Cool. So now we have access to Firebase. So we want to say Firebase, and then that's going to be .firestore. And I'm actually going to put these on individual lines so it's easier for you guys to see. So .firestore.collection. And what collection is it's basically very similar to a table in a database. Our collection, we're going to name notes. So we'll go ahead and name that notes. And I'll show you in just a moment what that looks like in that little table visualizer on Firebase. But for now, just follow along. So .collection notes, .onSnapshot. Now what onSnapshot is, this is actually very interesting. This is very powerful. OnSnapshot is going to automatically get called whenever this notes collection is updated inside of Firebase. So whenever something gets updated inside of the notes collection in Firebase, the function that we pass into onSnapshot will get called. And that specific function is going to be passed an argument automatically that we're going to be calling server update. So that's going to be the argument for the function that we're passing into this. And let's go ahead and create a const called notes, which is going to be our array. So we want to go ahead and set that equal to server update.docs, and docs is a property of the server update parameter. I'm sorry, docs is a property of the server update object that's getting passed into our function. And we want to map it. And so if you're not super familiar with the map function in JavaScript, I've got a really good tutorial on that. Go ahead and look in the description and watch that tutorial. It's very short, but it's got a visual representation of how map works inside of JavaScript. And if you're not very familiar with it, I highly recommend you watch that tutorial really quick because we're going to be using it a lot in this tutorial series. So let's go ahead and say for each doc, we want to create a const called data and set it equal to doc.data, which is a function which grabs the data from the doc. And we want to add a property to our data object that we're creating called ID. So data.id will literally just be equal to doc.id. And then we're going to return that. So we'll return data. So we successfully have an array of all of the notes, and then we want to go ahead and update our state. So this .setState. And inside of here, we want to update the notes slice of our state with our notes that we just created right here. So we're setting our notes state equal to this array that we just mapped right here. So we don't have anything inside of, we don't have any notes, so we can't really see what this looks like yet. But what I want to do is go ahead and create a console.log statement, console.log notes. And I want to save it because I want to show you guys what this looks like. So as you can see, we come here, and when I go to the console, we have an empty array, and that's simply because we don't have any notes inside of Firebase. So let's go up here to Firebase, and I want you to go back to your database, and you can see this table here. So when we add a collection, remember we called that collection notes, okay? And we click next. And then for each note, that's going to be a document, and it'll have this auto ID. And the notes are going to have three properties. The first property is going to be a title, and we'll just call it test note from Firebase. It'll also have a body, so we'll call it body, and then that's going to actually end up being a string of HTML. So in here, I'm just going to put an h1 tag, hello world, and a closing h1 tag. And then it'll also have a timestamp, but I'm not going to worry about the timestamp here in this particular case because we're going to automatically generate that timestamp. So I'm going to click save. And now you can see that we have a note here. And if you remember when I said whenever the notes collection is updated, it's going to automatically call that onSnapshot function that we're passing a function into. So let's go back over here. And as you can see, it went ahead and actually ran that function automatically simply because I updated the notes collection. So you can see here now that we have a title, ID, and body of a single note that we just created inside of Firebase. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and keep this console.log notes here just for reference, and then let's move on. So I'm going to actually remove all of these tabs up here so I can keep everything clean. And inside of the source folder, I want to create, I actually want to create 3 other folders. So we'll call the first folder editor. The second folder we will call sidebar. And then the third folder we'll call sidebar item. Now let's go ahead and get rid of, let's go ahead and knock this boilerplate stuff out. So inside of editor, create a new file called editor.js, and you're going to want another file called styles.js. And you're going to want to do that for each of these. So new file, sidebar.js, and a styles.js. And then finally, sidebar item.js and a styles.js for that one as well. So let's go inside of each of these and just create the classes and the imports that we're going to need for each of these so that we can start focusing on the functionality. So start by going into your editor.js, and I want you to find the editor.js file in the source code, and I want you to copy and paste these imports here. Once you have those imports, go ahead and come down here and type in class editor component. That's what we're going to call this class. It's going to extend react.component. And inside of here, we'll have a constructor that calls super. And then we have to go ahead and have the render function. And whoops. And the render function has to return some HTML. So what I will do is inside of here, I will just simply say hello from the editor. And that's going to be our class, our boilerplate code for our class. And what we need to do at the very bottom here is actually export this, but we're going to use with styles. So I'm going to explain how that works. Just give me a second. Let's go ahead and say export default with styles, which you can see we are importing right here from material-ui/core/styles. So export default with styles, which takes a argument because it's a function, and that is going to be styles. Now we're passing styles into with styles. With styles is actually going to return yet another function. So we'll go ahead and immediately invoke that function that it returns with our editor component. Okay. So what styles is it's actually going to end up being a function that we're going to put inside of the styles.js file here. You don't have to worry about that. I'm actually going to have you go ahead and copy that and paste it inside of here from the source code. But I want you to understand how this is working. So inside of here, there's going to be a function that has a bunch of a bunch of classes that are going to represent CSS styles. Here, it's taking those styles and then basically creating an object called classes, or a property. In React, it's actually props. So it's creating a prop called classes, and we're going to be able to access those classes from it'll look like this. It'll be classes, well, this.props.classes.class name. So that's going to be really helpful for us shortly. So go ahead and save this. Let's knock out the boilerplate code for the other two components. So go ahead and go to your sidebar.js file. And inside of here, go ahead, go to the source code, copy the imports, paste the imports inside of here, and then class sidebar component extends react.component. And again, we'll want a constructor here that calls super. And then under here, I'll just copy from my previous file here, the render function. And then instead of hello from editor, we'll say hello from sidebar. And then again, we'll say export default with styles. The first argument will be styles, and the second one will be our sidebar component. Okay. And let's knock out the final one. So under sidebar item.js, go ahead and go into the source code and copy the imports for it, paste the imports inside of here, and then go ahead and type in class sidebar item component extends react.component. And of course, it's going to have a constructor here with super. And then the render function, which I will again copy from the previous one. And instead of sidebar, we'll say sidebar item. So now we have the boilerplate code. Actually, I need to do the export. So export default sidebar item component. Nope, that's going to be with styles. Styles is the first argument, and then the sidebar item component. All right. So now we got all of that done. So the second thing that we want to do is you want to go into the source code, grab the styles.js file for each of these three components and paste them in. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. You go ahead and do it as well. So I'm going to start with my styles.js file for my editor. So under editor here, inside of styles.js, I simply paste this. And as you can see, styles is a function with a argument called theme that's passed into it automatically by Material UI, which returns an object of basically CSS classes and styles. So go ahead and save that, and then move on to the sidebar styles.js file. Go ahead and copy it from the source code, paste that in, and then do the same thing for the styles.js inside of the sidebar item. And once you have all of that, we have all of our boilerplate code, so we can actually go ahead and get started on the fun stuff. So inside of our app.js file, I'm actually going to get rid of all these tabs. Inside of our app.js file, inside of render, I want to actually render out our new components. So in React, we can only return one component, but we can have components inside of other components, or we can, let me rephrase that, we can only return one element, but we can have other elements or components inside of that element. So we'll create one parent element, and it'll be a div here. And I'll just go ahead and give this a class name of, let's say, app container. And then inside of here, let's go ahead and put in our sidebar component, which we are going to need to import. So let's go ahead and import sidebar component from, and that will be ./sidebar/sidebar. And we might as well go ahead and do the same thing for the editor. So import editor component from ./editor/editor. Okay, so we don't need to import the sidebar item component because the sidebar component is going to use the sidebar item component. So we don't have to use that inside of app.js. So we have that, and let's go ahead and also put our editor component inside of here. So let's save this and see what we end up with. All right, cool. So a whole bunch of nothing. It's still compiling on my end. Let me, there we go, cool. So as you can see here, we have hello from sidebar and hello from the editor. We also have a few warning messages, but we're not gonna worry about that. That's just saying, hey, you have imported some stuff, but you're not using it. It says no unused vars. That's because we went ahead and knocked out all those imports before we wrote the code. So just don't worry about these warnings right now. But as you can see, they are importing and displaying the components as expected. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and demonstrate the React quill, what it comes with, the features of it, and how we're going to be using it inside of this application. But before we do that, I need you to go to the source code. So go to the description, go to the source code, go into the public folder, and then the index.html file. And then what you'll see in the source code at the top of, inside of the header tags, at the very top, you'll see a link tag with, I'll show you exactly what it looks like here. It'll be right here. And this is what this is it's the styles for React quill. It's the style sheet. So go ahead and paste that in exactly where you see it here, save it. And now we have access to the CSS that we're going to need for React quill. So now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and move this window over here and actually bring it a little bit further over so you can see everything. Go ahead and have your editor.js file open. And I'm going to start moving this HTML onto its own lines just to make it look clean. And I'm going to get rid of hello from the editor. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is inside of this render function at the top, I want to go ahead and destructure out the classes variable. So I will do that now. So const classes equals this.props. So now I have access to that classes variable from this.props. And I want to go ahead and use that here. So we're going to give this parent div here a class name, and the class name is going to be equal to classes.editor container. And now I want to go ahead and throw in this React quill element. Oops. And save, and let's see what we end up with over here. So as you can see, we have a text editor inside of here. Now, it looks kind of wonky at this moment, and that's just due to the styles because we're going to have a little extra room for the sidebar, but this sidebar will be over here. And right now we have hello from the sidebar above it. So it looks a little weird right now, but that's perfectly fine. We'll get to that in just a second. But I just wanted to come in here and kind of show you what React quill comes with right off the bat. So as you can see here, it comes with all of what you need in order to get started with a text editor. Now it also has some built-in functions. So I'm just going in here and just kind of showing you that it has all this stuff built in. All right, cool. So it comes with some functions that are going to be really helpful for us when trying to use this inside of our application. So now that I've kind of demonstrated what that looks like, I think it's time to go ahead and start implementing some of the functions. Now, I want to go ahead and start implementing these functions while it does look kind of weird. So we're going to be using the console to do a lot of logging here. So just go ahead and have your console open, and let's go ahead and get started implementing these functions. All right, so the first property we're going to utilize from React quill is value. So the value we will set equal to this.state.text, and we've got this state variable here. So what we're going to do is whatever the text state is, it's going to be the value property of React quill. So as we update this state, it's going to update the React quill value property. The second thing that we're going to throw in here is onChange. And we're going to have a function called this.update body. So I'm going to put this stuff on its own line really quick. Just make it look clean. So we have value and onChange. Now this.update body is going to be a function that is going to be asynchronous, that's going to set some state. And once the state updates, we're going to call an update function that is going to do some stuff. I don't want to talk too far ahead. So let's go ahead and implement update body. So I'm going to put update body directly under my return. Sorry, under my render. So I'll go to my render function and create a variable called update body, which I'll set to a function. Now this is going to be an asynchronous function. So go ahead and add your async keyword, and it's going to accept a value. And we're going to do stuff with that value. So like I said, we're going to set some state, but we're going to wait for that state to update. So we're going to say await this.set state. And the chunk of state that we want to update is going to be text. And we're going to update it with val. And once that state is updated, we're going to call this.update, which we do not have yet. So underneath update body, we will create a function called update. Now this is where things get a little somewhat complicated. So I'm going to do my best to explain it for you. So we have a function called update, and we're going to set it equal to debounce. And we're going to pass a function into debounce, which is going to be the actual function. So I'll explain this in just a second. I just want to get this out of the way. Okay. So debounce is in our helpers. So if I go to helpers.js, we imported that right here. So debounce is in our helpers here. And what we don't want to do is every single time the value changes, go to the database on Firebase and update it. Because what that means is, as the user is typing in their text, every single time they type a letter or a character or a backspace or anything at all, it's going to make an HTTP request to the database, and that's going to get a little crazy. So what we want to do is we want to wait for the user to stop typing for 1.5 seconds before we call the database. And what this allows us to do is be a lot more efficient with our resources. So this is called debouncing. And we are basically this helpers, let's go back to it so I can show you. This helpers function, debounce, is going to take a function, okay? So that's why we're passing our update function to our debounce function. And what's gonna happen is whenever we're typing, each time it tries to call update again, it's gonna basically, in essence, cancel the last one until the user stops typing for at least 1.5 seconds. And when they stop typing for 1.5 seconds, the function will actually go all the way through and update will complete. So hopefully that makes sense. So the second parameter that we want to pass to this debounce is the amount of time. And like I said, 1.5 seconds, which is going to be 1500 milliseconds. So what is it we want to actually do with our update function? Well, for now, I just want to, so we'll say come back later. For now, all I want to do is log some stuff so I can demonstrate the debouncing effect. So we'll just come in here and say console.log updating database. And let's see if this works the first time through. All right, so I'm coming in here into my text editor, and I'm just typing some stuff. I'm typing some stuff, typing, and now I'm going to stop typing. Okay, you saw that I stopped typing for 1.5 seconds, and then this function appeared. It did not appear 20 times since I typed, 20 times or whatever. It only appeared once, and it waited for me to stop typing. So that is something that I wanted to teach you guys, is debouncing, and it's very important for this tutorial, especially because we're updating a database through the use of a user typing. So that could, if we have hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of users and we're updating the database every single time a user types a key, that's going to get out of hand. So we're going to use debouncing in this tutorial. Okay, so now what I want to do is start making this look a little better. So I demonstrated, what React does and, a little bit about debouncing. So what I want to do now is I want to start focusing on getting the sidebar component set up. And we already went through getting items from the database on, as soon as we load the app, we get all of the notes from the database. So since we already have access to the notes, we might as well go ahead and start working on our sidebar to display those notes. So go ahead and go to your sidebar component, sidebar.js, and let's go ahead and get started working on this. Now, the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and go under our super inside of the constructor and say this.state is equal to, and we want to put in adding note, and we'll set that equal to false. And we will put a title, which we will set to null by default. Cool. So let's go ahead and destructure a couple of property variables. So inside of here, I'll go ahead and prepare this. Inside of these curly braces, the variables that we wanted to structure out are going to be notes, classes, and selected note index. Now we're not passing these props yet. So since we're not passing these properties yet, we're probably going to get an error. If not, then that's great. But we'll go and we'll actually pass nulls right now. So let's go to the app.js and let's look. We have notes. Classes is automatically passed in through with styles, and we have selected note index. So let's go ahead and pass those two in. Now we have selected note index, so we can just go ahead and go here inside of our sidebar component element. We can say selected note index is equal to this.state.selected note index. I'm going to put this on its own line. And then the other one was notes, which we also have. So notes is equal to this.state.notes. And so now we won't get an error. So now that we have these destructured inside of our sidebar.js file, I want to go ahead and remove hello from the sidebar. And I want to give our parent div here a class name. So we'll give it a class name, and we'll use the classes object, classes.sidebar container. All right, so inside of here, I want to go ahead and add a button. And it's going to be a button with a capital B. And that's because it is if we go up here, I can show you it is a component from the Material UI core. And we're going to use that because it's going to just make it look a little better by default. So we're going to add a few things here. We're going to have an onClick. And the onClick function that we're going to provide here, we're going to write that function. So for now, we'll just call it new note btn click. And that's a function we're going to write in just a moment, so keep that in mind. We'll get right back to that. We'll go ahead and add a class name, and that class name will be classes.newNoteBTN. And inside of here, I'm just going to put the text to say new note. We'll change this in just a second. So let me go ahead and let's add this new note button click function underneath the render function. So here we will say new note btn click is equal to a function. And for now, I'm just going to have it say console.log. And I'm going to say new btn clicked. Cool. So let's see what we ended up with. So when we come back over here, you can see that we have this sidebar here. And that's because we already have the styles for it. We just added the container class here, which are all inside of the styles.js file. So we have the sidebar container, and we have this new notes button here. I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to click it. You can see now it says new btn clicked. So we know the button is working. So below the button, still inside of the div container, but below the button, we're going to put two curly braces. And what we want to do is we want to have the ability to add a new note. And if we click on new note button, we want the new note input to show up. So let's go ahead and say if this.state.adding note, put a question mark after it, we're going to use our ternary operator. As you can see, we have this adding note slice of state, which is false by default. So by default, this is not going to show up. So that's good, because we don't want the user to suddenly see add a new note unless they go and explicitly click that button. So if this.state.adding note, we're going to do some stuff. We're going to return a div. Let me go ahead and get that Otherwise, we're going to just go ahead and return null. Okay. So let's go ahead, go inside of this div and put in the stuff that we actually want to return if this.state.adding note is true. So the div is going to have an input. And the type of the input, type, is equal to text, and the class name is going to be equal to classes dot new note input. And we're going to have an onKeyUp function, but first let's add a placeholder. And the placeholder is just the text that's going to be inside of the input before the user starts to enter text inside of it manually. So we'll just say enter note title. And again, we will have an onKeyUp function, onKeyUp. And so whenever the user starts typing in there, whenever they lift their finger off of a key, a function will get fired. And it gets passed the event by default. And we want to pass that event to our own function, which we will call this.update title. And we will pass an e.target.value, which is going to be the target element of the event that got fired off that we're passing in from here, and the value of that. So we're going to pass that to our update title function, which for now, come down here, update title is equal to a function that takes some text. So just put text txt, and for now just console.log, and I'm going to say here it is, and I'm going to display the text that we passed to update title. Okay, so let's see here. Go ahead, and I think it's safe to save this. Let's find out. Clear this, see what happens when I click this. We got new btn clicked, but it looks like, oh yeah, that's right. We have to actually flip that variable. So when we have new btn clicked, we need to go ahead, new note btn clicked, we need to go ahead and flip that variable in the state. Specifically the this.state.adding note, because otherwise, if we don't flip that to true, this will never display right here. So we need to go ahead and do that. All right, this.setState. And then inside of here, we want to go ahead and update adding note. And what we want to set it to is not this.state.adding note. So if that's false, it'll flip it to true. If it's true, it'll flip it to false. It's just saying whatever this.state.adding note is, we just want it to be the opposite. And we also want to reset the title. And the reason why we want to reset the title is because when we're adding a new note, if we start typing in a title and then we want to stop adding a note, when we go to add another note, we don't want that previous title to still be in the input. So we're just going to reset the title and save. Let's see if that works for us, okay? Let's come over to new note. And when I click it, you can see now I have this input here. And when I start to type inside of it, it's saying it is actually logging it here as we expected. And then when I click new note, it makes it go away because we're flipping that variable. When I click it again, you can see it's empty. That's because we're resetting that title. That's exactly what we wanted to do. But here's the problem. When I click new note, it still says new note. I want it to say cancel. So I want it to say new note here because it makes sense. I want to click that. I want to create a new note. But now I don't want it to say new note anymore. I want it to say cancel. So what we want to do is we want to go inside where we put the text for that button where it says new note here. Let's put some JavaScript in there. So 2 curly braces, and we want to do a ternary operator. And we'll say this.state.adding note. So if that's true, we want to go ahead and say cancel. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and say new note. So let's save that. And it says new note. And when I click it, now it says cancel. Okay. That's exactly what we want it to do. Cool. So let's go ahead and move on. All right. So now what we want to do is we have that input. We have the enter note title input. Let's go ahead and go directly underneath that. And let's create another button with a capital B. And we want to create our submit button. So let's give it a class name. So that equal to classes dot new note submit btn. All right, I'm gonna put that on its own line. Make sure you guys can see everything. And then I want to add an onClick function. And we're going to call this .new note whenever we click this button, and we have to create this function. But for now, we'll go ahead and put some text in here that says submit note. Cool. So let's create a function called new note. And for now, just console.log. Let's just log the entire state. Okay. So we'll save this. We'll come back over here, clear this console so it's clean. New note. Now you can see the submit note button is here. I'll start typing in a title. And when I click submit note, the state is adding note is true and the title is null. The reason why the title is null is because inside of update title, we are logging instead of setting the state. So let's go ahead and set the state. All right, so the title, we will simply set that to text and then we will save. Okay, so let's demo this one more time. Say this is a title. And I'm gonna click submit note and you can see now that the state is properly updated. Cool, so there we go, cool. So I wanna come in here and I want to go ahead and start working on the list of all of the notes on the side. So let's go ahead and do that. So where we want to be is outside of these curly braces right here. We want to go beyond that and we want to add a list element with a capital L, and then inside of the list element, we want to put 2 curly braces, because what we're going to do is we're going to map all of the notes that we get from the props. So all of these notes here that we're passing in from the app.js, we want to take all of those notes and map those to actual elements. So again, if you're not super comfortable with the map function in JavaScript, I do have a tutorial for it that I think will really help you guys understand the map function in detail. Go ahead and look in the description for that video and then come back to this. If you are familiar with the map function, then let's go ahead and move on. So we're going to say notes.map, and we will have 2 parameters here. We will have note, so for each note and its index, we're going to go ahead and return some HTML. So I'm going to get rid of this curly brace, semicolon. Get rid of these semicolons here. So I'm going to have a div, and in React, whenever we map or whenever we're iterating through and creating a bunch of elements, we need to give a key to the parent. And I'm just going to use our index as the key. And what we want to do is for each and every single note, we want to create a sidebar item component. And sidebar item component is going to take several properties. So let's go ahead and start working on those props. So the first one is going to be note, and that's going to be equal to the note we're on. Second one is going to be index, and that's going to be equal to the index we're on. And I put a comma here, which I shouldn't have. All right, then we're going to have selected note index, which is going to equal selected note index, which we're getting right here. So we have direct access to that. Then we're going to say select note, which is going to be a function property here. And we're just going to say this.select note, which I believe we do not have implemented yet. So let's go ahead and create select note. It's just going to be a function that for now, I'm just going to say console.log select note, just to get that out of the way really quick, and we'll come back to it. Then we're also going to have a delete note function, which will do the exact same thing that we just did here. This.delete note, and we'll go, and I'm just going to copy this function and paste it, and then replace with delete. Okay, cool. So now we have a sidebar item inside of a div, but underneath the sidebar item, we want to go ahead and put a divider. And all the divider is it's just going to be a small dividing line between each of these sidebar item components so that you can distinguish them basically. So I'm going to save, and let's just take a look and see what we've got so far. We've got an error. So it says cannot read property map of null. And the reason why we are getting this is because, let's see, let's go back up here. We're mapping through notes, and map is a function of the array object. Okay, so if notes is null, then we're calling map on something that does not have a function called map. And for now, in editor, notes, sorry, not in editor, in app.js, notes is null. As soon as we load the sidebar component, we're passing in a null. Now later on, you can see that notes is being updated, but this is asynchronous, meaning that this isn't being, so notes isn't being set until after we're calling map inside of the sidebar component. And that's one of the frustrations that a lot of people have to deal with in JavaScript is the asynchronous aspect of it. So let's go ahead and take care of this problem right now. So in order to fix this little hiccup that we inevitably will have run into, I want to go ahead and take this entire return statement and I want to cut it. So I cut it so that I can paste it. And I want to put an if statement here where I say if notes. So in other words, if notes is not null, then I want to paste that return statement into there. Else, if it is null, I want to go ahead and return a small div that's just going to say add a note exclamation point, which, you know, this you'll probably never even see because even if the array itself is empty, it's still going to go down this route. So in reality, we could just put an empty div here. So I'm just going to actually put an empty div here instead. And so what we're doing is we're saying if notes is not null, then let's go ahead and do all this stuff. And if notes is null, we're just going to return an empty div. And so what's going to happen is inside of the app.js file, when it first renders the sidebar component, notes is going to be null because notes is null inside of the state by default. Then when this component did mount goes through and successfully retrieves all of the notes and sets this.state notes equal to notes, this is going to re-render with notes not being null, and then it's going to come back into this render statement. Notes will then not be null anymore, and it will go ahead and call all of this. And so map can actually be called on an empty array. That's perfectly fine. It just means we're not going to have any sidebar item components. That's the behavior we want. If notes is null, again, map simply doesn't exist on null. So that's why we went ahead and created this else. Hope that makes good sense for you guys. So come back over here and refresh. You see hello from the sidebar item. And that's because we have one note inside of Firebase. So it's rendering out one sidebar item component. And if we go to our sidebar item component, you can see that all we're doing here is saying hello from the sidebar item. So what we really need to do is go in and start working on our sidebar item component now. Okay, so let's go ahead, go to our sidebar item.js file. Go ahead and let's remove the constructor here because we're actually not going to be using any state inside of this sidebar item component, only props. So since we're only going to be using props, we can pretty much call this a stateless component, although it's not by definition because it is going to be using the props. So in a sense, it's kind of a functional component. So we'll go ahead and just call it a functional component. So this is going to be a functional component. So the first thing that we want to do is inside of our render, I'm going to get rid of this hello from the sidebar item and put everything on, put everything inside on its own line and indent it. Then at the top of the render function, I'm going to go ahead and destructure out some stuff from this.props. So if you remember, we had a bunch of different props that we were passing in from the sidebar component. We had note index, selected note index, select note, and delete note. So let's go ahead and grab all of those. So index, note, classes, which is being passed in through with styles by default, and selected note index. Cool. So the delete note and select note, we're not going to actually utilize inside of the render function. We're going to utilize that elsewhere. So we don't need to destructure that here. Cool. So let's return and let's go ahead and say the key here. Let's just add a key here and we'll set that equal to index. Then let's put a list item in here. And so what we're going to say is for each sidebar item component that we have, it's going to be a list item, which is a material UI component. So if we look back in here, we have this list component, which is also a material UI component, and we're looping through and creating list items. So let's give it a class name. Whoops, got to go inside of the tag here. Let's give it a class name. And we're going to set it equal to classes.list item. List item. And then let's give it a selected, which I'll explain that in just a second. Selected note index is equal to index. Okay, so let's go ahead and explain this. So selected is a property of the list item component, which if this selected variable is true, then it's going to be highlighted. And that's basically it. And so what we're going to say is we want it to be considered selected if selected note index is equal to our current index. And this index is actually our loop index that we have right here. So if the current selected note index is equal to the current item we're on, then we can safely say that this is the one that is selected. Okay. So let's go ahead and add align items. And let's set that equal to flex start. We could just use a normal string here. Celebrate. All right, so let's add a div. Okay, so inside of this list item, we'll have a div. And inside of this div, actually, let's add some class name. Is that a class name here? Classes dot, and we'll call this text section. And let's add an on-click. On-click. Let me just try to get everything on its own line so you can see everything clearly. On-click, and we're going to pass a function. So we're going to say this dot select note. Select note. And it'll take the note and the index. Okay, so we have this class name and on-click for the div here. And let's go ahead and inside of this div, use a list item text component. And again, this is just from Material UI right here. These are just components that come from Material UI that just make making things look good really easy. So all of these things tend to just use properties. So we're gonna go ahead and add them. Our primary is going to be our note.title. And our secondary, so it's going to have primary and secondary text. Our secondary text, now this is where we get to use another one of our helper functions. So for now, I'm not going to use it, and I'll show you why we need it in just a second. So note.body, substring 030 plus ... Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and explain what I'm doing here. So note.body could be a massive string because it's the entire body of the note. It's all of the text inside of the note. So we don't want to display that on the sidebar. It's just too much text. So I'm taking the first 30 characters of that. And then if it's more than 30 characters, I'm also adding ... at the end of that. So let's go ahead and let's see what happens if I save now. Let's see if we can see. Perfect. Okay, so test note from Firebase is the title, and the secondary text, so the test note from Firebase is our primary. You can see primary is note.title, and our secondary is this substring here. As you can see, it's working as expected. But as you can see, this is HTML. And the reason why it's HTML, again, is because in Firebase, we are storing this as HTML. React Quill actually stores the value of whatever you're typing inside of here as HTML. So we have that helpers.js file, and the second function here is called remove HTML tags, and that is exactly what we're going to use here to get rid of that HTML. So let's go ahead and take this section here, and cut, and then we're going to say remove HTML tags and pass that as the parameter. Save it. Come back over here, and now you can see it just says hello world ... instead of that HTML. Cool. So what we want to do is under our list item text, we have the closing div tag. Cool. So underneath the closing div tag, we want to create a delete icon. That's with a capital D, delete icon. And we want to add an on-click function, obviously. And the on-click function is going to be this .delete note. And we'll give it a class name as well. So the class name is going to be classes.delete icon. Make sure it's spelled exactly like this, because if it has a capital D, as you're creating these class names, just if you are wondering if you're spelling it correctly, you can look at the video, of course, but you can also go to your styles.js file and just look and see exactly how it's spelled here. So you can see which classes you have available and all of that inside of your styles.js file for each component. So I'm going to save that, come back over here, and now you can see there is a delete icon, which for now, if I click it, it's going to break us because we have not implemented this .delete note. So we have two functions that we need to implement. We have to implement our delete note and select note functions. So underneath our render function, let's go ahead and create a select note function, which will take an N and an I, which is note and index. And you can see we are already passing note and index to our select note function. So N and I, and we're just going to say this.props.select note. And we're going to pass N and I to that. And so this.props.select note, if we go back, we can see that we are in fact sending a property over called select note, which is equal to this.select note, which is a function inside of the sidebar component, which is just logging select note. Okay, keep that in mind. So I will actually save this and let's demonstrate that. So if I click this note, you can see now it says select note, and that is in fact coming from the sidebar component. So it's calling that parent function. Now we need to add delete note. Delete note, which is going to take note. Whoops, I gotta spell that. Note. And you can see when we call delete note here, this.delete note, we are passing the current note in. So what we want to do is we don't want to just let the user accidentally delete notes. So if they accidentally click the trash can icon and it deletes their entire, poem that they've been writing for a month, they'd be pretty mad. So what we want to do is say if window.confirm, and I'm going to put two backticks here. And I've made a lot of tutorials in the past, and people do get pretty confused about this. So I want to take a second to really explain this. The backticks tend to be underneath the escape button and above the tab button on a standard keyboard. They are backticks. They are not apostrophes. They are not quotation marks. They are backticks. And what the backticks allow you to do is they allow you to write in a string, but also allow you to add JavaScript to that string, and then it renders it out afterwards. So please make sure if this part is confusing to you, just make sure you're using the backticks before posting a comment. So let's say, are you sure you want to delete ... and then this is where we add our JavaScript. And in order to do that, we just put a $, an open and closing curly brace, and we'll say note.title. And see, it just takes this JavaScript and adds it to this string essentially. So if that's true, this.props.delete note. And I'll save and I'll show you what this does. So I'm going to click delete note. It says, are you sure you want to delete test note from Firebase? I click, yeah, I do want to delete that. And now you can see it logs delete note, since in the sidebar component, we're just logging delete note. All right, so we got through the sidebar item component. So we are getting pretty close here. We're actually getting to almost a functional Evernote clone. So if we go back to our sidebar component, we what we don't want to do is we don't want to just log stuff. We want to actually select notes and delete notes. So if we go to our app.js file, in the sidebar component, you can see we have a selected note index and we have notes as props. But what we really also need is we also need a couple of functions that we need to pass as props from the app.js file. And those functions are going to be delete note, new note, and select note. So let's go ahead and create those functions inside of the app.js file. We'll go ahead and create those functions. We'll add the functionality for those functions inside of the app.js file. And then we'll go back into the sidebar component and remove these console.log statements and actually implement the app.js functions. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's go to our app.js file and you can see our sidebar component here. Let's go ahead and start adding in the props. So delete note. We'll say this dot delete note, which doesn't exist yet. Select note, nope, not selected note. We want to make sure it's called select note because it's a function. And we will go ahead and give it this dot select note, which does not exist yet. And then finally, we will have new note, which we will again set to this dot new note, which does not exist yet. Cool. So let's make them all exist now. So let's see, what do we want to start with? I think select note. Let's do select note first. And the reason why I want to do select note first is because that way we can select the note. We can show that the selected property for the sidebar items, list items is working correctly. And also demonstrate the text. We'll have to go into the editor component in order to do a few small things so that when we select this, that text actually appears over here. So I want to go ahead and knock that out so that we can focus on the other stuff. So let's go ahead and go to our select note. Let's create that. Select note. And we will expect select note to take a note and an index. Whoa. And let's just say this dot set state. And we'll update some state here. We'll update the selected note index, which we have the index, so index, and then selected note, and we will set that equal to note. So I think we already have select note implemented inside of the sidebar item. So let's go to the sidebar item and just verify that select note, we are calling that. And then inside of the sidebar, select note is just logging. So what we want to do is actually call this.props select note. And we want to pass in the note and the index. Now let's just make sure the order is correct. It is note and index, so it's in that order. Note and index. And we need to actually, for select note, we actually need to accept n and I. And inside of the sidebar item component, you can see we are in fact passing the note and the index. That's what n and I stand for. We are passing that. So we just need to make sure that we accept those as arguments here in this function inside of the sidebar. And once we save, in theory, this should work now. Oh wait, it says note is not defined. That's in the sidebar, line 74. Yeah, it's because it's n and I, not note and index. So save that. That error should go away. Correct. So what happens when I click this? When I click that, now you can see it's highlighted. So we know that it is actually updating the state correctly because now we know that this is selected. So it's working. What's not working yet is we're not displaying that information over here. So let's go ahead and go into our editor component and start. We need to do a few things to actually display the currently selected note. So let's see. Let's start with the app.js file because we're going to have to pass in some properties to our editor component. I know this is all over the place, guys, so just bear with me. There's a lot going on in this tutorial. It is kind of an intermediate level tutorial, and there's a lot that needs to be covered. So that's why I'm kind of moving quickly and sporadically. But this is the way I actually work when I write code. Is I'm always going over the place. I'm not focused on one particular thing. I'm focused on the task that I'm trying to complete, which could be in 6 different files. So it kind of can seem like I'm all over the place, but in reality, I'm just focused on one task at a time here. So what we want to pass to the editor component is a selected note, which not select note, selected note. And we want to make sure that we set that equal to this.state.selected note. And then we want to pass a selected note index, which will be this.state.selected note index. And then finally, we want to pass notes, which is this.state.notes. Now, if we don't have a selected note, if we have not selected a note at all, then we don't want to render this editor component whatsoever. So let's cut that. And then let's put some curly braces and say this.state.selected note, question mark, so a ternary operator. Go ahead and render that out. Colon, in other words, else, we're just going to return null. Cool. So I will save that. And let's see what happens when I click this. So I click it, and now this appears. So we know, again, that our this.state.selected note piece of state is updating correctly. So I just want to demonstrate that one more time. We do not have the editor here. I click this. Now the editor is there. Cool. So now we just need to go into our editor component and actually accept those properties and begin displaying them. Okay, so where we want to start is you can see we have value, and value is the value of the React quill. So it's whatever's inside of here, and it's HTML. It's one big string of HTML. That's what value is. So it uses that value to render out all this stuff. Now, right now, this.state.text is always an empty string. So what we have to do is we have to go in and we have to update the this.state.text state with whatever property we have passed in. So let's go ahead and implement some lifecycle hooks to do that. But we're going to have to implement 2 lifecycle hooks, and I will explain that in just a second. So let's just go ahead and implement it, and then I'll explain why we're doing it this way. So component did mount. Okay. I explained lifecycle hooks a little earlier. So we'll say this.setState, and we're going to go ahead and set all the state. We're going to say this text is going to simply be this.props this.props.selected note.body. Then we also have a title, which is going to be this.props.selected note.title. And then finally, our ID, slice of state, is going to be this.props.selected note.id. Cool. So when we mount the component, when we first mount it, it's going to set this state. So I'm going to save it, and I want to see what happens when we mount it. I click it. Now you can see hello world is being rendered as an H1 tag, or a heading 1 here. It's being rendered properly. That's great. But see, what's going to happen is if we have multiple notes here, I want you to think about this for a second, okay? I'll prove it in just a second, but I want you to think about it first. So let's say we have 2 notes, and I select this note. Well, component did mount is called when that component first gets pushed into the DOM. So when we click this, it renders this this React quill component, and component did mount is called. Now, if we come over here and select a different note, this component is already mounted. Component did mount is not going to get called again. So how can we possibly re-update our state with the new props? Well, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use another lifecycle hook called component did update, and use an if statement inside of it to tell whether or not it is time to update the state or not. So I want to go ahead and just take a second and prove this, and so that it's not just theory. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so I'm over at my Firebase console, and I've got the database table here. So I'm going to add a new note. So I'm going to add a document, auto ID, and then we'll have a title. And, I'll just be like, yo, what's up? And then I'll put a body here, and I'll just put nothing much. And then give it an ID, which I don't think the ID is supposed to be in here. So I'll just give it a title and a body. and then save it. And that was supposed to be HTML. Let me actually update that really quick. The body is supposed to be HTML. We'll just give it a H2. Let's give it H2. Give it some variance here. Okay. So I'm adding this note really quick. So when I come back over here, you can see I have a second note because it updates automatically. So what do you think is going to happen when I click this? Just as I explained, right? I'm going to click this. It's not calling component did mount again. You can see that this is now the selected note because it's highlighted. So it's updating state properly. The problem is it's not updating the React Quill component at all. And that's because we're calling component did mount instead of component did update. But we have to do both. Okay. So we have to do both. So I just wanted to prove that really quick to show you that the problem exists and why we're doing it this way. So component did update. Okay. So this React hook gets called whenever the component properties are updated. And so we are going to put an if statement in here that says if this.props.selectedNote.id does not equal this.state.id. So that means if I come over here and I click this one, so say this is selected, and then I come over here and try to select it again, it's not going to call this function, okay? Instead, it's saying if the ID of the one that you just selected is different from the one that it's displaying, then we want to go ahead and call this again, which is set state. So I'm going to copy this and add some curly braces here and paste this in, save it. So now I'll select this note. You can see it says hello world, and then I'll come over here and select this note, and you can see that it does in fact display the note as expected. So now I can go back and forth between these two notes. So this is great. The only other thing we need to do inside of the editor component is implement our update function. So instead of logging, let's call this.props.noteUpdate. This.props.noteUpdate. Is that what we called it? Let me go back to the app.js file. Looks like we forgot to add that. So I'm gonna, inside of the app.js file, inside of the editor component opening tag, we need to add one more prop, and we're gonna call it note update. Note update. And we will set that equal to this.noteUpdate, which does not exist. So I'll come down here and just quickly say note update is a function. And I want to say note update. Let's see. Note update takes an ID and a note object. Okay. And I just want to log those whenever this happens for now. Okay. So back to the editor. So now that we have this, we can say this.props.noteUpdate. And remember, it takes an ID and a note object. So the ID is clearly going to be this.state.id, easy enough. But this note object is going to be, it's going to have two things. It's going to have a title, which will simply be this.state.title. And it's also going to have a body, which is going to be this.state.body. Okay, we save that. And so if I come over here and I start trying to update the note, so I'd just be like, yo, I'm just typing some stuff in here, and I stop typing for 1.5 seconds, you can see that it does console log the ID and the note object, and body is undefined here. So let's see, why is body undefined? So this.state.body appears to be undefined. Let's see. So it should be text instead of body. So this.state.text. Caught myself on that just in time. So let's go back over here and try to update this. So I type, and then I let go. And you can see that body is what we would hope it would be. So perfect. Now, of course, it's not actually updating that in the database yet. And that's because inside of the app.js file, we are simply logging and we're not going to Firebase. But like I said, I wanted to just knock out this editor stuff so we could get back to our app.js functions and we can start finishing up the app's functionality. So with that being said, let's go ahead and head over to our app.js file and start knocking out all those functions that we added to the sidebar component and also this note update function here. Okay. So what do we want to start with? Let's actually start with our note update function since we already pretty much have it ready. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and update Firebase. So we're going to say firebase.firestore.collection, and the name of our collection was notes. .doc, and we have the ID already because we're passing it in right here. So we have the ID for the document, very convenient. And we're going to say update. And all we have to do for update is pass in the object, and it's going to be title. So if you remember, if we go to Firebase, which I'm not going to do, but you can imagine, you can look at it yourself if you want as well. The object inside of the document is going to have a title and a body. But we also want to add a timestamp to it. And that's so that if you guys want to extend this application anyway, you can actually utilize that timestamp to show when it was last updated. So we'll say the title is equal to noteobj.title. The body is equal to noteobj.body. And then the timestamp is going to be equal to firebase.firestore.fieldValue.server timestamp. And what this is going to do is it's a Firebase function that's going to generate a timestamp for us on the server. So we don't have to worry about trying to create a date time object and all of that. It's going to handle it for us, okay? Cool, so I'm going to save this. And let's test this out. Let's go over to yo, what's up? And instead of nothing much, I want to come over here and say hello. And now you can see over here, it actually did in fact update Firebase because the body has been updated to hello inside of the preview as well. So let's go to Firebase and just make sure that that updated inside of the table. So I went to my Firebase console, I'm going to database, and then I'm going to go to that note. And you can see now it says hello instead of nothing much. Perfect. Cool. So now that we have that working, we have note update working. Let's go ahead and add the ability to create a new note. Okay. So let's go underneath note update and create a function called new note. Now new note is going to be asynchronous and it's going to accept a title. Asynchronous and it's going to accept a title. So by default, the new note's body will be empty and it'll just have a title. So we're going to say const note is equal to an object. And inside of this object, we'll have a title, which will be equal to title, which is coming from right here. And we will also have a body, which we will manually empty string that. Now below the note, we're going to say const note, new from db is equal to await. So we're going to await a Firebase call .firestore .collection. The collection is notes. Goodness. .add. So we're using the add function, which allows us to add an item to the collection. And it's going to have a title, which is going to be note.title. It's going to have a body, which is going to be equal to note.body, which is just that empty string, and then timestamp, which we can actually just go over here and copy what we had here. So we're going to create it with a timestamp here. Okay. So now that's the new note from DB. So what we're doing is we're just setting, we're creating this in Firebase, and then we're waiting for that to respond from the server, and then whatever the response is from the server, we're setting that equal to a variable called new from DB. So below that, we want to go ahead and create a const called new ID and set that equal to new from DB .id so that we can have access to that document ID that's automatically generated by Firebase. We can have access to that because we're going to need access to that. We're using that throughout the application, as you've noticed. So, right here, for instance, we're using it right here. You can see it all throughout the application right here as well. So we need access to that. So what we're doing is we're just grabbing that from the response. That's why we're accessing that. Then we're going to await again. We're going to await this.setState because setState is actually asynchronous inside of React. And we're going to update some state here. We're going to say notes. We want to update the notes array. And we want to use the spread operator to say it should be all of the notes we already have. So this.state.notes along with the new note, which note is this object right here. Okay. And let's see. Looks like, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So we're awaiting that. And then we want to say const new note index. So we want to go ahead and find the index of the new note inside of that notes variable. So I'm going to say this.state.notes.index of, index of, and I'm going to use, so index of is a function of the array object that finds the index of a particular item inside of an array. And so what we have to pass it is the actual item inside of the array. Now I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. This.state.notes.filter. Okay, so I'm going to filter through that array, and I'm going to find the one where the note is equal to the current note, the note that we're on. So we're iterating through for each note. We want the one where note.id is equal to new ID. Now that's going to return an array because filter returns an array, but we know for a fact it's only going to return one item because of this right here. So since it's only going to return one item, we can just go ahead and safely return the 0 index and know that that will be the one that we were looking for. Okay, so let's look at this line really quick. Const new note index. This.state.notes.index of, so we're finding the index of this one. And this one is this.state.notes.filter. So we're going through each and we're iterating through the notes. And we're looking for the one where it's equal to the ID right here. So we find the one with this ID inside of notes, and then we are selecting that automatically. Okay, hope that makes sense. This.setState, we're going to set the state now. And we're going to say selected note is equal to this.state.notes, and we're going to use that index that we just got, that new note index. Gosh, new note index. VS Code is not loving me today. Selected note index will simply be equal to new note index. Okay, so why is it we did all this? Well, when we create a new note, we want to go to the firebase, add the new note into firebase, and then we want to update the currently selected note with the one we just created. Now let's demonstrate that to see why that's a good thing. So hopefully this works. So I'm going to create a new note. I'm going to say test note. I'm just going to call it test note, and I'm going to click submit note here. And you can see that it did not successfully add the note. So inside of sidebar JS72, it's logging something instead of calling a function. So let's go ahead and let's fix that. So inside of sidebar component on line 72, correct, we are actually logging instead of calling the parent function. So let's see. The new note takes the title. So all we have to do is say here, we just have to say this.props.newNote and pass it this.props.title. This.state.title actually. This.state.title. So we want to pass in this.state.title to our app.js new note function. And then once that happens, we want to set some state really quick just to reset everything. We're going to say title is null and adding note is going to be false. Cool. So let's see what happens now when I come over here and try to add a new note. Call it test note, submit the note, and it creates test note in Firebase, and then it automatically selects it for us, and it automatically selects it here too. So I'm just going to say, is this working? Question mark. Wait for it to update, and you can see it does in fact update it over here. Fantastic. So this is actually coming along pretty well. So let's move on. I think the next thing that we're going to want to do is be able to delete notes. So what I will do is come over to the app.js file and let's implement our delete note function. So under new note, create a function called delete note. Delete note is going to take the note object itself, and we are going to say const note index. Note index is equal to this.state.notes.index of note. Cool. So now we have the note index, and we're going to say if this dot typing at an awkward angle. Okay, this dot state dot selected note index. If this dot state dot selected note index is equal to note index, then we'll say this dot set state. Whoops, this dot set state selected note index, and we'll set that to null, and I'll explain why we're doing this in just a second. And selected note we will also set to null. And then we'll have an else statement here where we will actually do the stuff, and then we'll say this dot state dot notes dot length, if it's length, if that's greater than 1, then we're going to do this, and this is this dot select note. Select note. We'll call this dot select note, which we have implemented here. So it takes a note and an index. So this dot select note, we'll go ahead and call that with the note and the index. Now, this is where things are going to get a little weird. So just try to follow with me and I'll explain it as I go. Okay. The note is going to be this dot state dot notes, and then we're going to access it by a index, which is going to be this dot state dot selected note index -1. And the reason why it's -1 is because now there's one less. So when we delete a note, we don't, like, if it's selected, for instance, if we have the note selected, then what we're doing is we're deselecting the note. That's why we have this if statement here. So if we have this note selected right here already, and then I delete the note that's already selected, we want to deselect that note in state because we don't want that to still be appearing over here. We're going to get server errors. It's just not going to work out very well. So what's going to happen is if you delete the note that you're already selected, we want to just deselect everything and kind of reset the state there. However, if the note that you delete, let's just say I have this one selected right here. Let's say, no, better yet, let's say I have this one selected. Okay, this is the third note in the list. If I delete the first note in the list, now there's only 2 notes in the list. And if there's only 2 notes in the list and I have the third one selected, then the third index doesn't exist anymore. So we're going to get errors. So what we're doing here is we're trying to account for that specific problem. So that's why this dot state dot selected note index -1. Okay, that's why we're doing that. So then we're going to say the index is this dot state dot selected note index -1. So yeah, so now we have the note, which is the current note -1, this dot state dot notes, this dot state dot selected note index -1. And then we also have to pass the index because that is the second argument to the select note function here. And that is simply this dot state dot selected note index -1. Okay. Whew. Got through that. So we'll put a colon here since we're still inside of the ternary operator. And, else if this dot state dot notes dot length is not greater than 1, well, what that means is we have no more notes. So let's go ahead and basically just copy this. Just copy this line right here. Let's deselect everything. So if we only have 1 note in this list and we delete it, there's no more notes. So we need to just deselect everything. All right, cool. All right, so now that we got all that taken care of, we can go ahead and go to Firebase and delete our note. So we'll say firebase dot firestore dot collection. I think you guys are getting used to this part pretty quick. Notes is the name of the collection. Dot doc. We have the ID, I believe. Let me just quickly, yeah, note.id. Note.id. And then we will do dot delete, which makes it really easy for us to delete it. It's built in to Firebase. So, all right, so I'll save that, but I'm not going to click delete yet because we still have to go. If we look at our sidebar item, we are in fact calling the delete note, and we're passing note as the parameter here. But in sidebar, we're only logging still. So we need to say this dot props dot delete note, and we need to pass the note. So we'll accept note as the argument here, and I think that's going to do it for us for deleting notes. So let's test it out. Let's say I select this note, and then let's say I delete the note that I have selected here. Let's see what happens when I do this. Cool, so I had a note selected, I deleted the one that I had selected, and now nothing is selected. That's perfect. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. Now let's select this note and delete the one underneath it and see if this one stays selected. Let's see what happens. It sort of worked, but it also didn't, because this is selected here, but our React quill component broke when that happened. So our state is correct, but we have to fix something in our React quill component for this to work properly. Okay, so after a little experimenting, I believe I found the problem that we had with where we were getting that error. And the reason why we were getting that error, I believe, is because we are not removing the, so let me get rid of this, sorry. So we were not removing the note that we're deleting from the note's state at all. So we need to do that. So what we need to say is underneath here, we'll just go ahead and do that really quick. Actually, I will make this asynchronous. So I'll say async, and then I will say here underneath the note index, I will await this dot set state, and I'm going to set the notes state, notes equal to notes.filter, and we just want to return all of the notes except for the note that we're passing in right here. So we're just going to say notes.filter, and for each note we want every single note where note does not equal note. And let's see if that fixes our problem here. Notes is not defined, line 87, and that's supposed to be this, wait, let's see. This is supposed to be this dot state dot notes. Cool. All right. Let's see if this fixes our problem. So I'll select this note, and then I'll delete the one before it, and we do not get the error. That's actually great. So that makes some of this code a little bit, I guess, pointless, because what we were trying to do is, if I come back in here and select this note, what I was trying to be able to do is have this note selected. And then if I were to delete this note, I would want this note to stay selected. So if I come back up here, delete it, you can see that it's no longer selected anymore. And that's perfectly fine. The reason why that's happening is because we're changing we're updating the state beforehand, before this if statement. But what I want you guys to do, since this is an intermediate level tutorial, I want you guys to figure out how to fix that problem. And you can clone the repository and figure out how to fix it. And then, if you want to post in the comments that you fixed it and share with others how you fixed it, absolutely, please do that. But I'm not going to fix that in this tutorial. I did want to leave you guys with a little bit of homework, and I think this problem is going to be perfect for you guys. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm also going to leave you with a little bit of extra homework afterwards as well. So let's go ahead and move on to the next function. This is actually going to be inside of our editor component, which we do not have the ability yet to update our titles. So we need to do that. So what we will do is inside of the render, let's go ahead and add a few more elements to our return inside of our editor.js file. So let's quickly come up to the top of our editor container here, and let's create a border color icon. And inside of the opening tag, we'll give it a class name that we will set equal to classes.editIcon. Whoops. All right, so we have the edit icon, and below this, we'll create an input. And inside of the opening tag, we'll add some props here, or not really props, since this is a standard HTML element, but you get what I'm saying. So class name, classes.title input, and then underneath that, we'll have a placeholder, which will be a plain string, and we'll say note title, ... value, which will be this.state.title. Whoops, this.state.title. So if this.state.title exists, we'll use the ternary operator. Then we'll go ahead and say this.state.title. Otherwise, we'll just do an empty string. And then we'll have an onChange function, onChange. And the onChange will, automatically get passed the event, which we will pass to our own function called this.updateTitle. This.updateTitle. And we will pass e.target.value to that. And underneath update body, we'll go ahead and create our update title function. So update title. And you can see we're passing the text in. So txt. And for update title, what we want to do is we basically want to do exactly what we did with update body. So let's say await. Let's go ahead and add async here. Whoops. Oh my gosh. Okay, async. We want to await this dot set state. The chunk of state that we are updating is the title. So it'll be title, and we'll set that equal to txt. And once that gets done, we will call this dot update. So it will also have a debounce effect as well. So let's see what happens if I come over here. Let me just make this a little smaller, make this a little bigger. Okay, you can see there's this input here now. When I come in here, I can highlight it, and instead of 2, I'll put like 222. And you can see it updates the title as we were expecting it to. So let's go through and test everything. So let's create a new note. I'm going to call this test note 1, just for the heck of it. I submit the note. It's automatically selected here. You can see I have a typo, so I'm going to fix that. I go in here to edit my note title, and it correctly edits the note title. You can come in here, add some text, and say, hello, this is working. And then you can see it updates here. I'll click this note. It now selects this note. Let's say I don't want all 3 2s here. I just want to put this as a test. It updates here. I can come back over here and let's just say, replace this with text that makes sense. Testing the body. Cool. So that updates. And now I'm going to delete this note. So I delete it. It deselects everything. I delete this note. Now we have no notes, and the app appears to be working perfectly. So final note test. Yep, it's all working as expected. So this is a fully functional Evernote clone application where you can take your own notes and everything. And as you remember, there was a small thing that you guys could fix on your own if you'd like to, which is the selecting. So if I have multiple notes and I delete one of the notes, keep the one that's selected instead of deselecting explicitly. Please try to fix that if you are interested in furthering your abilities within React. That would be a great exercise for you. Another great exercise for you is to go watch the other tutorial that I have in the description, which is for an instant messaging application, which it goes over how to create user accounts. So you'd be able to create user accounts, and then what I think would be interesting is for you to take this Evernote application and create user accounts so that a user can sign in and they can have their own notes, and then another user can sign in and they won't have access to any other notes but their own. So it's user based. So I highly recommend you try watching that tutorial, and then afterwards come back to this tutorial when you're done with it and try to combine what you learned in the previous tutorial and in this tutorial and see if you can add the ability to have users with this Evernote clone. All right, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I know that it went pretty quickly, and I know that it was probably a little bit confusing, but there are certain parts where it's good that it's confusing, if that makes sense. It's a little challenging, and you can stop, you can pause, and you can think deeply about these topics. And when you do get it, you get a good sense of satisfaction that you learned something new. So I really hope you did enjoy. If you did, please give me a like, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial.